Have you ever stopped to think about how many lives are shaped by circumstances they never chose? How many people grow up inside systems that decide who they are allowed to become before they even understand who they truly are? The story of Moses begins exactly there. Not with miracles, not with power, but with fear, injustice, and an impossible choice made by a mother who refused to surrender to cruelty. At the time, Egypt was the greatest empire on earth. Wealth, architecture, military strength, and absolute control defined its identity. But behind that greatness was a system built on oppression. The Israelites were enslaved, forced into exhausting labor, treated as disposable tools rather than human beings. Pharaoh feared their growth and responded with brutality. His command was clear. Every Hebrew baby boy was to be killed at birth. It was an attempt to erase a people by destroying their future. Moses was born under a death sentence. His survival begins with an act of courage that often goes unnoticed. His mother hid him as long as she could, and when hiding was no longer possible, she placed him in a basket and set him afloat on the Nile. This was not abandonment. It was an act of hope. Research in human behavior shows that when people are pushed to extreme limits, hope-driven decisions often become turning points that redefine history. This moment was one of those turning points. The river that symbolized death became the path of life. Pharaoh's own daughter found the child and chose to raise him. Moses was taken into the palace, educated, protected, and given access to power. From the outside, it looked like a miracle. From the inside, it created a lifelong conflict. Moses grew up surrounded by privilege, while his people suffered. He belonged everywhere and nowhere at the same time. This inner conflict slowly shaped him. Identity confusion is one of the most powerful psychological tensions a person can experience. Studies in developmental psychology show that individuals raised between conflicting cultures often struggle deeply with belonging and purpose. Moses was no exception. He was Hebrew by blood and Egyptian by environment. He could not fully escape either side. Everything came to a breaking point when Moses witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. In that moment, the injustice he had observed his entire life became personal. He acted impulsively and killed the Egyptian. The consequences were immediate. The palace that once protected him now became dangerous. The people he tried to defend did not trust him. Moses ran. The desert was not just a place of escape. It was a place of stripping. Titles, status, comfort, and certainty were all removed. Moses became a shepherd, living a quiet life far from power. Years passed. This season often feels forgotten, but it is essential. Psychological research consistently shows that prolonged periods of solitude and simplicity reshape perception, humility, and self-awareness. The desert was forming Moses in ways Egypt never could. Then the unexpected happened. A burning bush that was not consumed. Fire without destruction. God calling Moses by name. This moment is not about spectacle. It is about purpose. God did not speak to Moses as a prince or a warrior. He spoke to him as a man who had failed, doubted himself, and tried to disappear. Moses resisted the call. He questioned his ability. He focused on his weaknesses. He feared rejection. These reactions are deeply human. Fear of inadequacy is one of the most common barriers to action, confirmed by countless psychological studies on performance and self-perception. But God's response did not address Moses' skill. It addressed his presence. I will be with you. That promise changed everything. Not because it removed fear, but because it reframed it. Moses was not chosen because he was confident. He was chosen because he was willing to listen. And with that, the journey toward liberation began. Returning to Egypt was never going to feel like victory. For Moses, it meant walking straight back into the place he had fled in fear. It meant facing a past marked by violence, guilt, and rejection. The desert had given him distance, but not erasure. Now he had to confront everything he tried to leave behind. This detail matters because it reveals something deeply human. Purpose often requires revisiting the very places where we were once broken. Moses does not return confident or fearless. He returns aware of his limitations. That is why Aaron walks beside him. This partnership is not a minor detail. Studies on leadership psychology show that shared responsibility increases resilience under pressure. Moses was never meant to carry the weight of liberation alone. His weakness did not disqualify him. It reshaped how the mission would be carried out. Standing before Pharaoh was more than a political meeting. Pharaoh was not just a ruler. He was believed to be divine, the living embodiment of order, power, and cosmic balance. To challenge Pharaoh was to challenge the entire worldview of Egypt. When Moses says, "Let my people go," he is not negotiating labor conditions. He is declaring that a higher authority exists beyond Egyptian gods, beyond imperial control, beyond fear. Pharaoh's response exposes the core of arrogance. Who is this God that I should listen to him? This question is not curiosity. It is defiance, and it sets the stage for everything that follows. What unfolds next is not chaos. It is systematic exposure. The plagues do not happen randomly. Each one targets something the Egyptians trusted for security, identity, or survival. The Nile turning to blood strikes at the heart of Egypt's economy and spirituality. The river was worshipped as the source of life. When it becomes unusable, the illusion of control collapses. Frogs flooding homes and palaces confront the gods of fertility. Lice and flies expose the helplessness of Egyptian priests, who are unable to replicate or reverse what is happening. This matters because it reveals a deeper truth. When systems built on power face something they cannot control, their authority begins to erode from within. As the plagues intensify, Pharaoh's behavior follows a recognizable psychological pattern. He alternates between resistance and regret. Under pressure, he promises change. When the pressure lifts, he retracts. Modern behavioral studies identify this as situational repentance. Change driven by discomfort rather than conviction rarely lasts. Pharaoh does not transform. He protects his pride. Then, the plagues begin to affect livestock, health, agriculture, and daily life. Boils strike even the priests. Hail destroys crops. Darkness covers the land for days. This darkness is especially symbolic. Egypt worshipped the sun god as supreme. When darkness dominates, it sends a clear message. The things you believed were untouchable are not. Throughout all of this, Moses changes. Early on, he hesitated, argued, and doubted. Now he speaks with clarity. He delivers the message without embellishment. He obeys even when the outcome is uncertain. This growth reveals a key principle of transformation. Confidence often develops after obedience, not before it. The final plague is announced with a different weight. The death of the firstborn is not described as cruelty for cruelty's sake. It is the collapse of a system that built itself on the destruction of others. The firstborn represented legacy, future, and continuity. Egypt's refusal to release the future of Israel results in the loss of its own future. The Passover emerges here as more than a ritual. It is an identity marker. The blood on the doorposts is not magic. It is obedience expressed through trust. Anthropological studies show that shared rituals during crises strengthen group identity and long-term cohesion. This moment permanently defines the Israelites as a people set apart. When the cry rises across Egypt, Pharaoh finally releases them. Not because his heart has changed, but because his power has collapsed. Egypt lets Israel go, but reluctantly. This distinction matters. Freedom granted without transformation often comes with pursuit. As the Israelites leave, they do not walk out as warriors. They leave as former slaves carrying trauma, fear, and uncertainty. Liberation has begun, but healing has not. That journey still lies ahead. This part of the story teaches a difficult truth. Systems built on oppression rarely surrender peacefully. They unravel slowly, painfully, and often violently. And those who leave such systems must learn not only how to escape, but how to live free. The departure from Egypt does not feel like a celebration. There is no time for speeches, no sense of closure, no emotional relief. Everything happens fast. The Israelites leave in haste, carrying what little they can, baking bread without waiting for it to rise. This detail matters because it shows that freedom does not always arrive gently. Sometimes it comes suddenly, or the heart has time to adjust. Modern studies on abrupt life transitions show that even positive change can trigger fear and anxiety when it arrives too quickly. Thousands of people move together into the unknown. Families, children, elders, animals. There is no detailed plan, no visible protection, no clear destination. What guides them is not certainty, but trust. A pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night becomes the sign of direction. In human psychology, visible guidance during collective uncertainty significantly reduces panic and confusion. This guidance gives the people something to follow when logic fails. But freedom is fragile in its earliest moments. Pharaoh's decision to release the Israelites does not last. Once the immediate pain of loss fades, pride takes control again. The economic impact becomes clear. An entire workforce has vanished. Pharaoh gathers his army, chariots, and commanders. The most powerful military force of the ancient world begins its pursuit. This moment reveals a recurring pattern in history. Oppressive systems often regret releasing control and attempt to reclaim it once they believe fear can be restored. When the Israelites see the Egyptian army approaching, panic spreads instantly. Ahead of them is the sea. Behind them is the army that once owned them. There is no escape route, no tactical solution, no safe option. This is one of the most emotionally honest moments in the entire narrative. The people turn on Moses. They accuse him of leading them to death. They say it would have been better to remain slaves than to die in freedom. This reaction is deeply human. Psychological research calls this phenomenon loss aversion. When faced with extreme uncertainty, the brain often prefers familiar suffering over unknown possibility. Slavery was cruel, but it was predictable. Freedom is terrifying because it removes structure, even if that structure was abusive. Moses responds differently than he once would have. Earlier in his life, fear drove him to run. Now, fear does not silence him. He tells the people to stand firm and watch what will happen. This is not confidence rooted in self-belief. It is trust rooted in experience. Moses has seen what obedience produces, even when it makes no sense at first. The moment that follows becomes one of the most iconic scenes in human history. The sea opens. The path appears where there was none. Regardless of how one interprets the mechanics of this event, its narrative impact is undeniable. The impossible becomes passable. The barrier becomes a road. Neuroscientific studies on belief formation show that experiences perceived as miraculous permanently reshape what individuals believe is possible. After this moment, nothing looks the same to the people who cross. The crossing itself is not instantaneous. It is a walk, step by step, surrounded by walls of water, moving forward while danger remains behind them. This detail is often overlooked, but it is essential. Faith, in practice, is rarely a leap. It is a series of small decisions to keep moving forward despite fear. When the Egyptian army follows, the outcome is final. The waters return, the threat disappears. What once dominated them no longer exists behind them. This is not just a military victory. It is psychological separation. For the first time, the Israelites see proof that their past cannot reach them anymore. The reaction that follows is emotional release. Song erupts. Celebration breaks out. Music becomes memory. Anthropological research confirms that collective celebration after trauma reinforces group identity and helps process fear. This moment anchors the experience into the people's shared story. Yet even here, the story remains realistic. Celebration does not erase trauma. Singing does not undo years of suffering. The people are free, but they are not healed. Freedom removes chains, but it does not immediately rewrite thought patterns. That work lies ahead in the desert. This stage of the journey teaches a crucial lesson. Deliverance does not end struggle. It changes its form. The enemy outside disappears, but internal battles begin. The Red Sea marks the end of slavery as a condition, but not as a mindset. And so the people move forward, not yet knowing that the hardest part of freedom is learning how to live without chains. After the celebration fades and the echoes of victory disappear into the desert air, reality slowly returns. The Red Sea is behind them, but the wilderness stretches endlessly ahead. Freedom, once imagined as relief, now feels heavy. The desert is vast, silent, and unforgiving. There are no cities, no farms, no visible resources. What once felt like rescue now feels like exposure. This is where the journey becomes deeply personal. Very quickly, the people begin to struggle. Water becomes scarce. The heat is relentless. Fatigue settles in. Complaints rise. They grumble against Moses, questioning his leadership and motives. This reaction is not simply ungrateful behavior. Psychologists recognize this as a natural response to prolonged trauma. People who lived under oppression often feel disoriented when control is removed. Freedom requires decision-making, responsibility, and trust, muscles that slavery slowly weakens. When the water runs out, fear takes over. Moses cries out, and water flows from a rock. This moment carries deep symbolism. Provision comes from an unexpected place. A rock, associated with hardness and impossibility, becomes a source of life. This pattern reinforces a central message. Survival in the desert does not depend on environment, but on dependence. The people are being taught to look beyond visible conditions. Soon after, hunger replaces thirst. Food is gone. Once again, the people complain. They remember Egypt as a place of abundance, conveniently forgetting the chains, the whips, and the humiliation. This selective memory reflects a well-documented psychological defense mechanism. In times of stress, the mind often romanticizes the past to escape present discomfort. Slavery becomes tolerable in memory when freedom feels uncertain. God responds, not with punishment, but with provision. Manna appears each morning. Simple, sufficient, temporary. The rules surrounding it are intentional. Gather only what you need for the day. Do not store it. Trust tomorrow will come. This daily dependence reshapes the people's relationship with survival. Studies on behavioral conditioning show that daily reliance breaks the illusion of self-sufficiency and builds trust through repetition. The manna is not just food, it is training. The exception of the Sabbath reinforces another principle. Rest is not weakness, it is obedience. The people are taught to stop, even when fear urges them to gather more. This rhythm introduces structure into freedom. Without structure, freedom collapses into chaos. Conflict does not disappear. Tensions rise within the community. Arguments break out. Moses feels overwhelmed. The weight of leadership presses heavily on him. His father-in-law Jethro observes and offers wisdom. Delegate. Share the burden. This moment highlights a timeless leadership truth. Burnout comes from carrying what was never meant to be carried alone. Modern leadership studies confirm that sustainable leadership requires shared responsibility and trust. As the journey continues, the people arrive at Mount Sinai. The atmosphere changes. Thunder, fire, smoke, and trembling ground surround the mountain. Fear grips the people. This moment is not about intimidation. It is about gravity. The people are not just being rescued. They are being formed. Liberation without moral structure would lead to destruction. Identity must follow freedom. Moses ascends the mountain alone. This separation introduces a new challenge: waiting, silence, absence. The people struggle deeply with this. The human mind resists waiting without visible reassurance. Studies in cognitive psychology show that uncertainty combined with silence increases anxiety faster than direct threat. The people begin to feel abandoned. The desert has stripped them of chains, but it has not yet stripped them of fear. They are learning that miracles do not eliminate the need for growth. Daily provision does not erase impatience. Freedom reveals what slavery concealed. This stage of the journey is slow, uncomfortable, and necessary. The desert exposes what must be healed before the people can enter something greater. It teaches them how to trust without spectacle, how to obey without force, how to live without masters. The wilderness is not punishment. It is preparation, and the most difficult lessons are still ahead. While Moses remains on the mountain, something begins to unravel below. The people wait. Hours turn into days. Days stretch into uncertainty. Silence becomes unbearable. This is one of the most revealing moments in the entire story, because it exposes a truth about human nature that transcends time. When guidance becomes invisible, anxiety grows. When leadership feels absent, fear looks for substitutes. The people begin to question whether Moses will return. Their fear is not rooted in logic, but in insecurity. Cognitive psychology shows that prolonged uncertainty creates emotional distress stronger than direct danger. Faced with the unknown, the people seek something tangible, something they can see, touch, and control. They turn to Aaron and ask him to make them a god to lead them forward. The request is tragic and revealing. These are the same people who witnessed the sea open, who ate daily provision from heaven, who walked guided by fire and cloud. Yet the invisible feels insufficient. Aaron gives in to pressure. Gold is collected. The calf is formed. What was meant to represent gratitude becomes an object of worship. This moment is not simply idolatry, it is regression. It is the human tendency to replace trust with control. When Moses descends the mountain, carrying the tablets of the law, the contrast is devastating. Order meets chaos. Covenant meets compromise. In a moment of righteous anger and grief, Moses breaks the tablets. This act is symbolic. The agreement has already been shattered before it could be fully lived. The law was not meant to restrict freedom. It was meant to protect it. The Ten Commandments represent something revolutionary for the ancient world. They define a society built on responsibility, dignity, and moral limits. They establish boundaries, not to enslave, but to preserve life. Principles like honoring parents, protecting life, respecting property, and guarding truth form the foundation of stable communities. Historians and legal scholars widely acknowledge the influence of these principles on modern ethical systems. Moses confronts the people, but he does not abandon them. Instead, he intercedes. He places himself between justice and mercy. This moment reveals the full transformation of his leadership. The man who once doubted his voice now risks everything for those he leads. Intercession becomes an act of sacrificial love. God allows the covenant to be renewed. New tablets are given. This detail matters deeply. Failure does not end the story. Restoration is possible. Psychological studies on recovery show that rebuilding after failure, when paired with accountability, strengthens resilience and identity. Israel does not emerge perfect. It emerges aware. The presence of God becomes associated with the tent of meeting, not fixed, not distant, mobile, near. This reinforces the idea that divine presence travels with the people. Relationship replaces fear. Moses speaks with God openly, honestly, intimately. His humility becomes his defining trait. As time passes, the people continue their journey. They stumble, they learn, they grow. Moses, however, will not enter the promised land. This is one of the most sobering elements of the narrative. Leadership does not always come with personal reward. Sometimes it means preparing a future you will never see. Moses' legacy is not geographical, it is transformational. He leads slaves into identity. He replaces chains with responsibility. He teaches a people how to live free without destroying themselves. His story is not about perfection. It is about obedience, persistence, and growth through failure. Historically, Moses becomes one of the most influential figures in human civilization. Spiritually, he represents intimacy with God. Humanly, he reflects struggle, doubt, frustration, and perseverance. His life proves that calling is not about qualification. It is about willingness. The story of Moses endures because it mirrors our own journeys. We all face systems that shape us. We all fear uncertainty. We all struggle between trust and control. Freedom is not just release from oppression. It is learning how to live without chains inside the mind. The final question this story leaves is not ancient. It is personal. What are you still carrying from Egypt? Fear, guilt, control, dependence, like the Israelites. We often leave physical captivity long before we leave emotional captivity. Moses' journey reminds us that liberation is a process, that growth happens in stages, that failure is not final, and that the path to freedom almost always passes through uncertainty before it leads to purpose. This is not just the story of a man who led people out of slavery. It is the story of how freedom is learned, protected, and lived.